everybody. Hope doing well. I'm really excited and pleased to at least virtually join you back to Mumbai, where I really miss. And I hope to enjoy the talk. I try to keep it not that academic, but bear with me sometimes if I just explain something basic in kind of academic sense. I do believe it's good to also mention that I have a cross-disciplinary background. Let me make sure I'm in the right place. And sorry. Yeah, I have a cross-disciplinary background coming from architectural background. Then I study my second master's degree in urban morphology. Then after that, I moved to more cultural urban studies. Technically, I became a kind of urban anthropologist and heavily involved with the historical study. So often my works and my research are kind of defined based on such a background, which is coming from different disciplines. And I have to say, until the end of my PhD, always all my research have been focused in Iran. Then after my PhD for some years, I work on Mumbai, where I kind of fall in love with the city, as you can imagine. My work on Mumbai was mainly focused on Muharram. I will explain in what sense. And let's start with that. Sorry, just have to move back to here. Share my screen. Can you see the PowerPoint now, Farouk?
Yes, we can.
Good, wonderful. So my talk is going to be about, as the title says, is about Mumbai Muharram. The reason that I simply call it Mumbai Muharram, because I always argue and believe that Muharram rituals are very unique in Mumbai, because, and that's why I believe that the whole cosmopolitan process of Mumbai that shaped city during last 2 centuries also was a place where Muharram ritual was constantly reinvented and changed. And that makes Muharram very unique in Mumbai. Although India has own Muharram, as I explained, but even though that, I would say Mumbai Muharram is extremely unique because of the cosmopolitan context that we had and experienced through the history. So what I'm going to try today is explaining how the Muharram ritual was a part of the history of Mumbai during last 2 centuries, and how the ritual was changed, and was not only was changed, but also was cause of the changes in urban history. I want to just, not in an academic sense, but very brief, explain how I refer to urbanization and cosmopolitan process. Often urbanization is explained as a process of immigration from the rural area to cities, but often I understand it differently and explain it in a different way. Urbanization and cosmopolitan process is not just about immigration to cities, but is a complex process of social negotiation between those people who are arriving in the city to define their position and shape and reshape a social urban society, basically. And in the case of cosmopolitan cities like Mumbai, because obviously this became extremely diverse. So people are coming from different backgrounds, both social and religious background, and became extremely complex process to negotiate their position. If I want to just articulate it in the sense, sorry for the noise on the background for printer. So for example, one of the key points to understand in Mumbai is understanding ethnic and religious diversity, because in Mumbai, the diversity is produced based on ethnic diversity multiplied by religious diversity. So it became very complex. Therefore, often I articulate Shia and Muslim community as a fractal community. So my argument is there is no things called Muslim community or Shia community. There is no such a thing, because each of these groups, even within the Shia community of Muslim in Mumbai, there are so many different groups that during the last 2 centuries, although there was a kind of intimacy between them, but they always refused to be melted down and being fully integrated as a one community. So they always use different technique to keep their own separate identity compared with the other Shia or other Muslims. Although my argument or my point would sound like a kind of postmodern argument or kind of idea, but I was very fascinated to see, even in early 20th century, letter from somebody from Mumbai challenging the British approach to understand Muslim and Indian community or society. So I found a really interesting kind of letter from somebody called Rafuddin Ahmad, sending to the Times of Bombay, arguing that the Brits should learn more about Indian community, especially Muslim community. And he, as I highlighted, they say the Muhammadan community in Mumbai there is no such thing, basically. They are very diverse. And then through that article or letter, he explained that there are so many different people that they are extremely different, both in terms of the school of Islam that they are followed, their cultural background. So they are extremely diverse, and you have to understand, you can't call everybody as a Muslim as simple as that. So it's much more complex in kind of context. So if we want to move based on this kind of background, also I understand Muharram ritual, not just in Mumbai, almost everywhere, not just as a religious ritual, which is obviously it is a religious ritual, or even a social ritual, but I call it urban ritual because, especially in 19th century, Muharram in Mumbai was the biggest festival of the city. And that was a kind of a medium or a social practice that people who are arriving in Mumbai using the ritual to define their own identity and their position within the whole urban society. And this kind of social function, or let's say urban function for the Muharram ritual, makes it in a kind of unique situation, as I said, because it used to be the biggest festival of Bombay. Therefore, they constantly change it in order to negotiate with other people who are involved with the ritual and want to define their own unique Muharram and unique identity. So that's my general kind of brief academic background on the context. However, I would briefly also mention three terms that if somebody is studying or reading about Muharram would come across. The three terms of Muharram, Ashura, and Karbala was to just briefly mention what these are, what meaning. So Muharram is the first month of Islamic lunar calendar, and Ashura comes from the term of Ashura is the 10th of Muharram. Ashura is coming from Ashara, means 10 in Arabic, and Al-Ashir means the 10th, but Ashura is a specific term for 10th of Muharram. So it's not just 10th, but the 10th of Muharram. It used to be, the Ashura day has a very symbolic and mythical kind of meaning in history of Middle East. But for the Shia context, or the context of we are talking, is referring to the day when the grandson of Prophet Muhammad in a tragic event has been martyred because of a political dispute in the first century of Islam. And the place that this tragedy happened, it was the place used to be a plain called Karbala, then became a city that known as Karbala today. This tragic event wasn't the cause of division between Shia and Sunni, as often you may have. It's not the cause of the division between the two branches of Islam, but that's one of the most important historical incidents that defined the division. However, I have to say that's a kind of move us to the case of Muharram in Mumbai. The Muharram ritual in Middle East, in Lebanon, in Iran, in Iraq, obviously, and other Shia contexts in Middle East, commemoration of Muharram and Ashura is defining the division between Shia and Sunnis. So, like if you go to Iraq, in Lebanon, which is more kind of diverse countries, so those communities who commemorating Muharram are those who are Shia. However, in India, as obviously you know that from your own direct experience, there is no such division. So one of the points that always I'm making in any conference about Middle East when I'm talking about India is to explain why in India Muharram is not purely or solely associated with the Shia Muslims. So let me start with this image, which is, I believe, is not only a historical picture, but is extremely important to explain how the Muharram has been transformed in India, and Indian create their own, very own Muharram. And as you can see, first of all the Muharram processions are symbolically or a funeral. So it's a Muharram processions are often a symbolic funeral of the martyrs of Karbala. So often in Middle East, these processions end up to a cemetery. But because of the Indian concept of a funeral, in India, at least even now, most of Muharram procession ends at the seafront. And that's the case in Mumbai. This image is extremely interesting to show the arriving of procession to the seafront in Back Bay in Bombay. So here I want to just emphasize on one thing to explain how a ritual will be transformed from its own origin to a very different context. In order to explain how a ritual will be transformed from its origin to other contexts, often I use the term of ta'ziyah, which I guess you heard of it. However, the term of ta'ziyah within the context of Muharram ritual has a very different meaning in different contexts. For example, in Arabic context of Lebanon or Iraq means mourning session or service session, because ta'ziyah is coming from mourn in Arabic. In Iranian context, however, we call passion play or religious theater that basically perform the tragedy of Karbala, we call that ritual or performance, we call it ta'ziyah. However, in India, ta'ziyah has a very different meaning and is basically a kind of a symbol that they created and they carried during the ritual and immersed it in the sea. So you can see how even the meaning of a term would be fundamentally different, let alone the social function. So I'm not going to go to the detail of why not only Shia in India, but also Sunni Muslims have been involved with the Muharram. But possibly you heard that even in Bombay, it is known that the lower caste Hindu also been heavily involved with the Muharram ritual and procession. But what it makes it very interesting in the case of Mumbai, or generally in lots of other cities in India, it was the Sunni community of Muslims who claim authority over the Muharram ritual, not even the Shia. I will explain that one a little bit later. But another thing that I would like to explain is that fascinating image. The whole Muharram ritual is about mourn for Shia. But you can see that image is full of joy and passion and dancing. So it shows that was a pure festival. It wasn't just a normal mourn session or rituals, basically. So that's the first thing that I definitely want to just emphasize to grasp the context of Muharram in Mumbai. So let me move on explaining what was the kind of how the Muharram ritual was performed during 19th century in Mumbai. So it was, I may just make it simple. I'm not going to go to the detail, but there was lots of service session in the Shia places, but there was two types of procession in Mumbai. One was called Tuli procession. That Tuli procession was run by a group of people coming from a certain mohalla. So it was a kind of representation of a mohalla committee, let's say, not committee, sorry, the mohalla. So they're running the processions in a small group of men with lots of performance and dancing and playing music, walking and moving around the city, kind of claiming authority, even challenging other neighbor mohalla. And that often you can see is a lots of performance like a tiger man, which is a fascinating again, because that's a sign of Shia idea. So the Shia Muslim, they know the first Imam Ali as a lion in Middle East, especially in Iran, but this lion transformed into tiger because of the cultural context in India. So they referred as a tiger, Babar, or this way. And so that was the second segment of the Muharram. So that was running almost from the beginning of the Muharram, the month of Muharram, but became more common after the 7th. So I have to explain basically the main period of time that they basically commemorate Muharram is from the 1st of Muharram till 10th, which is Ashura Day, and the ritual all became more vivid and more active after 7th. So these processions, they run almost from the beginning of Muharram to the 10th. However, the biggest basically aspect of Muharram was what was called taboot procession, often in Mumbai. And that was the biggest, that's what is called the biggest festival of Mumbai. So there have been people running the procession, carrying tazia and taboot and all different kind of symbolic flags ending to the seafront. So here, almost everybody being involved. I'm sure you are familiar with this image. I don't need to explain it for you. I'm sure you recognize the building. So I'm going to just explain now, as I said, the Muharram wasn't limited to the Muslim. It was involved also with Hindus and other communities. So I'm going to articulate that by putting different layer of historical information that I collect from different places, how basically the Muharram ritual was performed within the city. I'm sure, as you know, the city was divided two parts, the fort, which was the walled city, and then that, as the Brits call it, native city, or that's the place that we should call it Mumbai, basically. So I'm going to just focus on actually there are 3 sheets of map that I got them from the German National Library. Now, some of you may already saw these images, these maps. There are 3 sheets. The fort is shown in one map, and 2 other maps that are combined them here. They're showing the native town or the actual part of Mumbai. To give you an idea, basically, that's almost Muhammad Ali Road here, and that's JJ Hospital. So I'm sure you well know all these kind of places. This used to be a tank, it still used to be an empty place. And here is generally, that part is the area that we call it Dongri these days. So these are like Bendi Bazaar, all that's these places like this here. So one of the things that social scientists, including historians, often neglect is they're fascinated with the map, is beautiful, but they are not actually digging into the material that you can find in this archive material. Obviously, because of my background, I'm more curious about map and images. So I'm going to give you a really interesting point. So you can see there is so much text around. I'm going to focus on one part here. Here they shows actually all of the religious places, including mosque, church, Hindu temples, and Parsi temple and Hindu temples. First of all, it's very interesting why the mosque been listed from the as a first. I'm not sure why is that. It could be because of the colonial kind of discourse. However, what I'm going to try to see here, first of all, shows how Muslims and religious places and other basic religions have been distributed in the city. Then give us an idea how the whole idea of the point that I made is how Muharram ritual was performed. So here, that's the same map. I just turned it to black and white to be more clear where I'm talking about. So here, all of these blue dots are the churches, basically. As you can imagine, there are few of them within the city and some of them are in the suburb. Here are the Parsi Temple. I'm sure you know this is not the fire temple, although it's a religious place. That's the buried place for the Zoroastrian. As you know, that's as they call it, Dakma or Dakhma in Farsi. And so let me move to, that's Hindu temples. And here are the mosques. There are 2 places that I should explain. First of all, that's the Jama Mosque. And here is not the normal mosque here. That's this area, which is next to the back bay, actually. So there used to be Iranian, that's a forgotten Iranian cemetery. So therefore, because of all Muslim cemetery, they have a mosque. So that mosque belonged to that cemetery. But later on, they've been basically closed. And as far as I know, still Iranian, they are fighting to get it back. This one also is a mosque in cemetery. That's the Ismaili cemetery that I'm sure you know. This is Jail Road, almost. So these two are exceptional mosques in that map. But I would say, if you look at the map, you can see, first of all, how the Muslim places, they dominate the city, which is very unusual. Imagine the number of the number of the Muslim population in Mumbai in 19th century was almost like today. So 10% of population was Muslim. However, the number of the way, as I call it, the built environment manifestation of these community are much more than 10% of population. Part of that, why there's so much mosque here, somehow it shows the diversity among the community, because everybody want to have their own mosque to keep their own separate identity, distinguish their own identity from the other group of Muslims. So that also shows the diversification of the Muslim community. If we put them together, you can clearly see how the city was divided. So that part is dominated by Muslims, and here obviously there are almost no Muslims. So it was a kind of social division, spatial division in the city. Now let me put them together in different layer of information. That's I'm trying to explain. When we say the Hindu also been involved with the Muharram, I'm gonna just illustrate that detail, because sometimes we can claim something, but if we put layer of information from the different materials, archive material, it makes it very obvious and undeniable. Interestingly, here I just basically draw the border between each ward of the city in 19th century. However, as you may know, still we are using the same area in Mumbai today. So the A ward, C ward, B ward, they're still the same, but obviously the numbers are much more now. So I draw the border between the territory of administrative territory of different wards. Also, I put those mosques. So let me zoom on that part. So you can all this mosque. But what else I did, I started reading during my field, apart from my field work, I did a huge amount of archive work. So I think I read like possibly 2,000 police reports, for example, to see how the Muharram was controlled. So every people who want to run the procession, I have a taboot or tazia, they have to get the license. So I had a huge amount of information. For 1 year, what I did, I put those information that they got the license from the British authority, or basically the Bombay authority. So, and then I'll put them, it depends on the ward, and put them in that table. Let me start with that. The ward A, which mainly, the fort was a part of it, there was 0 mosque, but you can see how many licenses they got for the processions. The ward D, there was 0 mosque, but too many licenses being issued for people. Here in area of F and G, also there's huge amount of license. So it shows, although the Muslim community are mainly focused in ward B or B ward, and a little bit in the C, but the Muharram procession license has been issued across the city. So it clearly shows us the Muharram ritual wasn't associated with the Muslim only. So that was what we call an inter-community ritual, at least in 19th century, till mid-19th century clearly. So I'm gonna move quickly toward what's happened during the Muharram, during the history, the second half of 20th century, second half of 19th century. So essentially, you have to think about it like that. The city, Bombay, was a little town. Within 1 century became a 1 million population. So people coming to the city was, it was a huge amount of immigration to the city. Muharram was the biggest festival of the city. And everybody wanted to use the Muharram ritual for negotiating their position. So it became a kind of noisy ritual and lots of tension, which is very normal for every single ritual, even theoretically. So I'm gonna move forward to see what's happened. So as you know, in 1862, that was basically the fourth wall was demolished And there was a huge kind of opportunity to just these two parts of the city join together. But the point is, now the fort was open up to the native people. Native people, when we say, means non-Brits, let's call them, because there was no, there was people in Bombay from all over the place, not only from all over the India, but all over the Indian Ocean area. So from Arab countries, from Iran, like Asia, all over the place. So those people who live in the native town. So the fort was open up to that. So the ritual, especially the Tuli procession, that they often been called the very noisy processions, they come to the fort to claim that they're all kind of the access to their space. So therefore, the very first Muharram regulation was issued in 8671. And for that time, which was the first regulation, they abandoned entering of the Tuli procession into the fort. So that was the beginning of the attempt that the colonial authority tried to control the procession of Muharram. Basically tried to comprehend what was happening in Mumbai, where was the main route of taboot procession. So I have to kind of cross-check map with police reports. What I did for the second half of the 19th century, I review, I don't know, possibly 1,000 police reports. Many of them, they are actually explain where the procession is supposed to go, and then it corresponded with the name of streets. So, and I draw that map. So that's the main route of Muharram procession, end up to Madi Banda. And that's I have to say, this is the main route. It doesn't mean the people are coming from all over the city, joining the main route, moving toward the seafront here. Although almost every single report that I read for 19th century shows that was the route, and that was where the procession end. However, there are extremely few, I have to say, very few, possibly one travelogue that explained the procession was end to the back bay. Also, we have also, as I showed before, this cover or drawing shows that at least the caption of the image shows that's the back bay. So it's either for sometimes the procession end up to the back bay, or it could be some people go there, but all of the historical evidence and report shows that that was the main route. And because of that time, there was a tram here. So the whole city was basically a stop. Everyday life was a stop in Mumbai during Muharram, including all of the alcohol shop and all of the tram through the Muhammad Ali Road being closed, basically a stop walking during that time. And so let's move forward a little bit. As I said, that's the back bay. Although all the report shows the route was there, but I mean, there are very few that evident that the back bay also was for sometimes was the destination of the procession. Obviously, as I said, every single ritual is involved with tension, but the tension and violence within the ritual is different from the violence or tension during everyday situation. This is a long kind of theoretical discussion. I don't want to go through it. That's why is that. But generally, as I said, because of the ritual, or what we call a liminal time, so it's a kind of suspending situation, everyday life or everyday norm or ignore, and the new and ritual rule we basically apply for the behavior of people. And we says ritual are a way of channelizing tension, social tension. So tension being always involved. However, the colonial authority, often they try to basically exaggerate the violence or tension during their ritual. And again, interestingly, we have enough historical evidence showing that these colonial language are basically exaggerating the situation. Like, for example, one of the, this one, it should be in 1879. I'm sorry, that's the typo here. So it's explaining actually the procession being always peacefully in Mumbai, even the number of casualty during London, Mayor of London show in London has more casualty compared with the Muharram procession. So it is extremely important to see some of these very tiny but interesting historical report that we have. However, there is no doubt that gradually, because of the Bombay became a kind of melting pot of people arriving in the city, everybody involved with the Muharram ritual. So gradually, this social tension between new arriving people basically heated up. For example, let me put it in this way. As I explained at the beginning, the Muharram ritual in Middle East is a Shia ritual, and it is associated with the Shia faith. However, the Sunni community basically claimed the authority over the ritual. For example, in mid-19th century, when Iranians arrived in Mumbai, they started performing a ritual called a street play, or horse procession, they call it in Bombay. Because the Konkani Sunni community of Bombay, they claimed authority over the Muharram, they make a case against Iranian in a court, eventually they've been successful to ban Iranian Shia ritual in the city based on the claim that these newcomers, people arriving in Bombay, they want to change the ritual. So you can see that kind of this tension gradually add up. And we had an 1893 riot in Bombay, which possibly, there is no doubt, that was the bloodiest riot happened in 19th century of Bombay, which was started during the Muharram, clashing between Muslim and Hindu. It had a bit of background, but that was 1893, it was just a major riot. It was the bloodiest riot in Bombay. There are huge amount of basically official report. There are two major basically report by the governor of Bombay and police of Bombay. There's huge amount of archive material about the detail of that. I don't want to go through that detail, but that riot ended up with a regulation issue in 1895, and that was the beginning of changing the landscape of Muharram. That regulation announced refusing issue license for non-Muslim for Muharram. So from that date, they're excluding Hindus from Muslim. So this is a typical colonial kind of approach, because they want to use a certain kind of modern definition of dividing people like that. Because in India, there was no such division between people. But they start saying, okay, you know what, this ritual is about Muslim, so we are not going to issue the license for Hindu people in Bombay. So that was the beginning of a huge change, because after the riot, the tension was there. And then this was the Tilak who used the situation to reinventing Ganpati festival, which is I had a book chapter on this actually, because I'm very fascinated with that event. And he actually extremely, I believe he was extremely initiative, because let me explain it in this way. Muharram ritual was essentially Indianized in India. So the whole idea of Muharram procession was basically reinvented based on the Hindu idea of the funeral. So it was end to the seafront. However, what Tilak just think about and basically initiative was, there was in Bombay, there was no ritual totally dedicated for Hindus to use the ritual challenging colonial authorities. And obviously for him, also Muslims were a kind of colonial kind of segment of Indian society. So what he did, he reinvented Ganpati festival to give it to the Hindu, give a power to Hindu people in Bombay to challenge not only the colonial authority, but also even the Muslim community. Why I'm calling it a reinventing the Ganpati procession? Because Ganpati was a festival for centuries in India. However, this was mainly performed by upper caste or wealthy family. And the other thing that was that then it was a very family festival. It wasn't a kind of social festival. So it has nothing to do with urban society. So every family, they have own Ganesh, and they brought the Ganesh to the seafront or river. during 10 days. So there was no kind of intense festival. But what Tilak did, he got the idea of Muharram from Muslim, because every Mohalla has one group running together the procession to create a social solidarity among the locality. The other thing is, although there was a procession during 10 days of Muharram, but the main procession ran on 10th. And that's what Tilak actually used. So he transformed the Ganpati as a family festival into as a social festival, or let's say community festival. So every Mohalla have their own band or group of procession for running procession. And he asked to carry the Ganesh on the 10th of the festival, the 10th day of the festival, to make a huge crowd. And that's why I call it the reinventing of the festival. And however, this is very fascinating event, because although the reinvention of Ganpati was the way that basically dividing urban society to the Muslim and Hindu, however, there was a kind of link remained, because these two festivals, technically, they borrow from each other. And then I was fascinated to see when after the 1992 incident of Babari Mosque in Bombay, in Dharavi, people to create social, basically conciliation, they start running both Ganpati and Muharram in the same route to create a social cohesion again. And when I heard that, I was totally shocked, because naturally ritual and procession create tension. But the local people, I'm not going to go through the detail, but they says we have to accept each other. But what I fascinated for me was, because of this historical, let's say, root or heritage of this ritual that they have borrowing from each other, people in Dharavi have been able to run the procession in the same route. Otherwise, it's not possible to do that. So the kind of what I would call it the spatial organization of the ritual was the same. Both of them are end up to the seafront. And that's why both of them, they end up to the Mahim Bay, obviously. But so this two correlation is a fascinating to see how the Muharram was changed in India, and then how the Ganpati was reinvented based on the idea of Muharram procession. And obviously, although the Bombay has been known for Muharram in 19th century, but today obviously is known for the Ganpati. So after the incident of late 19th century, 1893 incident and violence, there was the situation calm, and then was some tension again. I'm not going to go through the detail, but there was another tension happen, that the Muslim community, they've been able to basically calm it down and control the situation by having a committee of controlling the ritual. However, the colonial authority basically abolished that committee, and then the tension was raised, end up with one of the most important regulations that happened during Muharram ritual. So it was 1912 when Edwardes, famous police commissioner of Bombay, issued a new regulation. Then, although the regulation wasn't ban the ritual, but there was long list of basically condition to issue the license, as such that all of the Muslim community refused to accept it, and then nobody applied for the ritual. This is a critical and turning point in history of Muharram. I want to just mention about what I said about the Ganpati and reinvention. Edwardes has two famous books, and I'm sure you possibly, sorry, I'm going to hold it in a way that you can see it. Yeah. So these have two books. In both of them, he extensively actually addressed these points. So it's not my own interpretation that Tilak just used Muharram. That's a narrative that also Edwardes mentioned. So Edwardes was behind the 1912 regulation. And the reason that I'm saying is a turning point, because so in the end of 19th century, the Muharram became a Muslim ritual. So it was inter-community ritual. End of 19th century, after the riot, it became, and regulations, it became Muslim ritual. But then from here on, this is a turning point, making Shia, the Muharram in Bombay, a Shia ritual. which is unique again in India, I would say. So what's happened here, because people, they stop applying for procession, the whole commemoration reduced to service session, to the mourn session. Obviously, for the Sunni Muslim, there was a no joy to join the service session for mourn, because the procession was involved with the joy as well, I would have to say. So practically, the only form of commemoration was the service session in Shia places, predominantly in the places associated with Iranians, or as I will explain, in Bombay, they call them Mughals. So what's happened there is another fascinating point, because the procession was technically a stop in Bombay, but what's happened, because in Bandra by the time, there was a small group of Muslims, including Khojas, moving to Bandra. They built their own Jama Masjid in Bandra, which still exists. So there was a small community of Shia Muslim and other Muslims in Bandra. What was happened, the procession kind of immigrated to the Bandra. Although we have some of other historical evidence that the Andheri and Bandra, there was a ritual, but suddenly, because the ritual was banned in the city, people start focusing their procession in Bandra. There was a simple reason. Bandra administratively was outside of Bombay. So the regulation issue for Bombay was not, the colonial authority wasn't able to apply it for Bandra. So Bandra for years, couple of decades, was I would call it a refuge for Muharram procession, where Muharram was preserved and then later on was revived. So by even from right at the beginning of 1912, we have lots of reports explaining the procession was run in Bandra. It became a huge procession, as much as the traffic was stopped during Muharram in 1940s. I review lots of archive material, including newspaper report, explaining even there was a new rule for traffic in Bandra and Mahim area because of the size of procession. However, what was happened, Muharram gradually revived in Bombay. By who? By a group of Muslims called Iranians, or Iranian Isna Ashari, or Iranian Shias, that they call them Mughal. This is Mughal Masjid in Jail Road, Dongri. I guess possibly not all of you seen inside of the mosque, but at least you are familiar with the area, the Jail Road and the mosque. So one of the very first things, this mosque was built by Iranian traders in exactly mid-19th century. He was one of the most influential merchants in the city. So if you are interested on that, I had actually even a chapter on this topic about the Iranian communities. But one of the things that I want to say is that this mosque obviously been built not only by Iranian enterprise, it was an Iranian enterprise, but also they invited architects from the city of Shiraz, because the founder of the mosque was from Shiraz. So the architecture is not just Iranian, it's just one of the best, although it's a humble, small mosque, but it's one of the best example of 19th century mosque in Shiraz area. So the architect was coming, and that's the inside of the mosque. But one of the things that I would like to explain, this about, because it's helped me to explain why, when I said the people arriving in Mumbai, they've been negotiating their own identity, and their identity being reinvented. So why Iranian being called Mughals is a very interesting point. I was searching for that, finding anything in historical document. There was no way to find any trace. So through my interview with lots of people, I came to the conclusion, they mentioned that in Bombay, as you know, we have actually 3 communities of Iranians. Sometimes they are neglected with each other. The first group, which is all well known, is the Parsi community. These are the Iranians moved to India. Often they've been known as when the Arab conquest of Iran, the Zoroastrian, they moved to Gujarat or India, and they're known as the Parsi, who during 19th century, they came to Bombay and became their own kind of homeland. Bombay became the home of the Parsis. And however, in late 19th century or mid 19th century, although Iranian Muslim, or let's call them Iranian Isna Ashari, there was a committee from right at the beginning of 19th century. Often they've been a kind of wealthy merchant from two cities of Bushehr, Shiraz, and also, Trishti and Shushtar. And that's why for those places that I will explain later on, they are actually funded by those people of coming from these three cities. However, late 19th century, because of a famine, a big group of Zoroastrians immigrated from Yazd in center of Iran to Bombay. However, there is a huge difference between these Zoroastrians with the Parsis. First, obviously, Parsis being elite and wealthy and upper class, I would say. These people coming from around the Yazd, they've been peasants and very poor, basically coming from rural area. So when they're arriving in Bombay, they imagine, first of all, not only the socially were different compared with the Parsis, however, the Parsis also forgotten Farsi or even Pahlavi because they speak Gujarati, as you know. But these people coming from Yazd, the Zoroastrian, they speak Farsi. So people in Bombay, to distinguish these two groups, although they are both Zoroastrians, they call the second group, they call them Irani. So if you go around the restaurant, there are lots of places they call them Irani place or Iranian restaurant. And many of these Zoroastrian, even they have Irani family today in Bombay. Following this Zoroastrian group, there was a huge group of Muslim Isna Ashari from Yazd. They say we follow our fellows of the village. So moving to Bombay, so people in Bombay, they have to invent a new name for this group because now they have three groups of Iranians. So what they did, they started saying, okay, these are Iranians. So they are not the Parsis, they are not the Iranis. So what they call them? They realized, okay, they are Muslims and they are speak Farsi, which was the Mughal administrative language, Mughal Empire administrative language. So they called them Mughal. For comfort, basically make it easier for themselves, right? So Iranian became known as a Mughal, while they had nothing to do with Mughals. The only kind of relation is just they are Muslim, but not Sunni, and they speak Farsi. So interestingly, Iranian, they told me, the third and fourth generation of Iranian, they say, obviously, we are not Mughal, but we are Iranians. That's why they're emphasizing always that the mosque is called Iranian mosque, but nobody, if you ask where is the Iranian mosque, nobody knows where is that place in Bombay. Fascinatingly, some of these people, they told me, obviously they moved, some of them, they have a connection to Iran for business. So they have a religious place in Tehran for their community. But in Tehran, they call it Hindi Imambara or Hindi Hosseiniya. So they say as well, we are called Mughal in India, and we are called Hindi in Tehran, but we neither Mughal nor Hindi. So that's shows how identity is invented and negotiated in the kind of cosmopolitan context. So let's move on, because I'm going to explain what was happened and why the Iranian community became or the Mughals became extremely important group in Bombay for the Muharram ritual. If you walk around Dongri, these places are the most important kind of Shia place. They are not all of them, but the most important one. This one is called the Mughal Masjid, that's Shushtari Imambara, and that's the Safi Mosque, Rosat Tahira, a couple of other Iranian again, Imambara here. That's Iranian cemetery now. They use it by all Shia Muslim in Mazgan, and that's Hassanabad, where Al Khan's graves is located. Here is the Hoja Masjid. What's happened? Let me stay in that map. When I talk to Iranian, they say when the procession was stopped, what we did, we have series of service sessions in different Iranian places. Mainly, that's called Namazi Imambara, which now today is known as a Zainabiya. Then Shushtari Imambara, the Mughal Masjid, and another two places here. What they did during 1930s and then 1940s, they start having series of service session here, and then initiated what they call it silent procession. What does it mean? They said, we had a service session here, for example, and then we walk all together without doing anything to the second place, and then move forward like that. So they technically, they initiated a silent procession in this route. So that was a reviving of procession in Bombay. That was 1940s. Later on, after independence, and gradually lots of the Shia Nawabs coming from all over India, moving to Bombay. The Shia population basically increased. As they says, they increase a kind of confidence. Gradually, this silent procession became a proper Muharram procession. Later on, there was a mahfil initiated here, not far from Hunda Corner. Then the procession was expanded from this place, from this mahfil to the rest of route. And then later on, the procession was fully revived, which is actually the second procession, from the Dongri area, which is the heart of the Shia Muslim and the Muslim area, to the Hassanabad, Rahmatabad cemetery, which is against just opposite to the Hassanabad. However, as I said, because always these people, they keep their own separate identity. When these two processions expanded, Iranian, they keep their procession within this small area. So they never join the major routes of the procession. But the point is here. So while the Muharram procession was inter-community, going to the Back Bay or Madhibanda, which is very Indian, very cosmopolitan, then when it was stopped, it was revived not as an inter-community procession, but however as a Shia ritual. So it's no longer towards to the seafront, but to the cemetery associated with Iranian. And I have to say the Iranian identity for the Shia community in India, across India, has a unique position because of the country of Iran, the position of country Iran, or the contribution of Iran to the Shia history. So that's the key point that you should bear in mind. Later on, obviously, as I said, that the Muharram ritual is just performed all over Bombay, even to Mumbai. These areas that are basically signed as the places, but Dongri remain the heart. The reason is, all of these historical Shia Muslim places, they are all predominantly located in Dongri, where the kind of Shia historical identity being constructed there. I'm going to move forward because now we speak for long. I'm going to give you some image here, so I'm not going to talk that much, except I'm going to. So during Muharram, the whole Dongri area is just totally transformed. All of the shop change, and lots of vendors are arriving for certain things related to the. So these are zanjir, sharpening the blades just for one ritual. So all of the streets just changed to the cooking place. They actually even install some symbolic things that's related to the Karbala tragedy, often attracted lots of ladies to, is all the kind of models. And then obviously there's a huge crowd. That's the from Mahfal, where is just next to the Honda corner. This the people get together from all over the Dongri and then run the procession from here back to. So let me just go back here. So people are gathering in this place here. Here, that's the day before Ashura. So get together, have a prayer here, and then running the procession to here. And then Ashura day, they're moving from JJ Hospital, is going to the Rahmatabad. So these images, I'm going to give you just a kind of idea of what's happening. So that's during procession, they carried all different kind of symbols. And then also, one of the other things that was revived, as I said, the Iranian passion or street play called horse procession was banned in 19th century. But when the ritual was basically revived during second half of 20th century, these rituals also basically revived. So it is a kind of street play performing the tragedy. So that's one of the scene of the ritual. So They are fighting. So it's a street play without any kind of verbal. So it's just a meme. But people, because they know what was happening in tragedy, they understand what's happening here. So here is in one of the Imambara. Interestingly, you can see that's the Shia saints, Imam Hussein, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, and that's his enemy fighting. And not surprisingly, you can see that this is a colonial dress showing the bad person. And the person they choose, they say Dr. Ali instead of Imam Hussein. I was curious why. But then I realized he used to be physiotherapist of the Indian cricket national team for some time. So he was a very positive person, even in reality. So he played the role of the, let's say, good guy or Imam Hussein, and somebody else just dressing like a colonial person as a bad boy. And if you walk around in Dongri, you can see these places they are installed for Muharram. Some area they are very different. This is all belong to the Boras or Bori, as they simply call them in Bombay. And that's another point that I'm saying, that although there is the Shia communities, they are performing all together, but they keep their own ritual separately somehow with the very tiny things to keep their own separate identity. So although all of the Isna Ashari Shia, they're always dressing in black, and those places that they install for Muharram, they're all covered with the black paper, black fabric. For the Boras, they glorify the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. That's obviously coming from the Hindu kind of culture, using flowers. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Boras community. That's a Bendi Bazaar, where the Rosetta Tahara are located. So their ritual is extremely exclusive for their own community. So no other Shia actually are kind of allowed to join the ritual. So that's the Muharram. I was networking to join the ritual because an outsider is not allowed to join the ritual. So after lots of networking, I was invited. So I was very amazed to see these Boras coming from all over the world from the Muharram to see their own spiritual leader. Obviously, Burhanuddin, the spiritual leader of Boras, now passed away. So that the time that I was doing my field work, that was his kind of time. And I was kind of invited for the ritual in kind of VIP situation. So I was able to meet him. But my point is here, so although the ritual is performed by all Shias in Bombay, however, it doesn't mean that they are melting together. Like the Boras, they have own separate identity, the Hojas, although they do all together, but at the same time, there is a border between. Very last thing that I would say is a new dimension in Muharram, which I call it the counter ritual, I call it, because Bombay used to be the new culture, new idea coming to Bombay during 19th century, even 20th century, by immigrants coming from all over the India and all over the Indian Ocean region. But in more recent time, I would say there are a new dynamic. There are lots of Indian labor coming back from other countries. They brought new idea and new concept. So Wahhabism, which is a branch of Islam, kind of orthodox, hardline, Sunni kind of school of Islam. There is a new community of Wahhabis in Bombay. These are often coming back from Saudi. There are a small community in Dongri, in Jail Road. And funnily enough, these community, the Wahhabis, they are refusing any form of commemorating for dead people. And they are actually they're known as commemorating the death of somebody as a sin. However, because they are new community, they want to negotiate their own position in the city. They want to claim their authority over the city. They start having a ritual, but not to commemorate, obviously, the tragedy, but they want to use this liminal situation of the ritual to negotiate their position and even make a barrier for the Shia ritual in the city. So this is the open area in Jail Road. And they have a mosque behind that gate, very small mosque, but they have claimed this area, this open space next to the jail, to place their own ritual and block the other ritual. So You can see these are carrying a taboot here, but the road being blocked. So there is a kind of negotiation here. Therefore, I would say Muharram ritual wasn't always a Shia ritual. It's have been constantly reinvented over the history because of the cosmopolitan of the city in Bombay. So the negotiation between different people, everyone who arrive in Bombay, they define their own ritual against others. And through that process, Muharram being constantly reinvented and changed. And that was a part of the cosmopolitan process of the city as well. I'll close my discussion, and I'm hopefully not being bored too much. And if you're interested, obviously I'll publish quite a bit about Muharram in different aspects of Muharram. Here is a list of publications that I have on Muharram. I guess the Khaki friends, they can just share it with you later on if you want to dig in up. The only book that I would possibly, if you want to just study the topic, is that book, which is very comprehensive. I have one chapter here edited by Peter van der Veer, which is, which one is that? Is Muharram Procession, this one. So Muharram Procession from seafront to cemetery. This is a very kind of condensed discussion about the whole dynamic, but the other publications are very detailed, either historically or conceptually. Like, for example, this one is about, as I said, about the fractal identity of the Muslims. This one is about the relationship between Muharram and Ganpati. That one is a very overall here. And like, for example, that's about just about Iranian or the Mughals here. And this one is very theoretical. It's published it's about flagellation, but it's extremely theoretical. Yeah, I stop here and then I'll open up to, I hope that you're not being bored too much.
Thank you very much, Reza. That was really fascinating. It's a totally different angle on cosmopolitanism. Tell us, how long did your research into the Mumbai Muram last? And before that, how did your interest in this aspect of Mumbai culture start?
All right, let me start from why I just joined, start working in Mumbai. My PhD was about Iranian Muharram in Iranian cities. Obviously, I did that this PhD research in architecture school, which it was on urban morphological studies. So my thesis was involved with the cultural study, at the same time modeling and mathematical analysis for the city structure to understand how the procession being basically procession route being decided. However, the overall idea of my thesis, which is the core, my theoretical contribution to the topic, was to understand what I call it the spatial aspect of ritual. So how the ritual is a spatial system, and more important, is an urban phenomenon. So that's a very different compared with other anthropological studies on ritual studies in general. So my theory, my PhD, and then later on my book, which is later on being published very differently, to articulate and develop a new theory of ritual from a spatial aspect. So when I finished my PhD, I had a kind of map, I would say, explain what was the context of Iranian city in which I study Muharram. Because my point was for my PhD was about how Muharram procession been changed during modernization of Iranian city. So for me, changing of Muharram ritual was a way to understand modernization of Iranian cities. So at the end, although I developed a kind of new theory, I said, but the Muharram is not always performed in the purely Shia context. So there are other contexts like India where Shias are in minority group, or there are countries like Lebanon where the Shia are majority but not in power, or sometimes they are in minority but very influential. So I had a kind of matrix explaining where I can move next research project. So obviously Bombay was one of my kind of imaginative target. Luckily enough, right after my PhD, Max Planck Institute, they're looking for somebody work on religious rituals in mega cities. And I got the fellowship there, and then I started working in Mumbai. So when I arrived in Mumbai, it was entirely new for me.
Okay.
So it was intensive field work, obviously. Imagine when I arrived in Bombay, knowing nobody, but very quickly I had a huge network of friends and local people that are, they told me about the city, understand. And then I also obviously participate in ritual like local people for 2 years. So the difference between my work with many other historians, like, because I actually own kind of, I borrow a lot of ideas from other historians like Jim Masalos, but what makes my research was different was I wasn't just look at the historical evidence. I was doing field work, participating in rituals. So for me, these historical information been linked to what I was experiencing in the context.
So it was a live.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was a live project in that sense.
Yeah.
Since
exactly.
you mentioned maps, Ashwin was asking if there is, or if it could be prepared, a color-coded map on all these various processions and how the various community sects commemorated Muharram.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the one of the problem is producing map, although it's one image, but you need a huge amount of energy to prepare even one simple map. That's why these maps that I show here, they are being prepared for different publications. That's why sometimes they are graphically are not the same. But it is possible, luckily, we have huge amount of historical information. As I said, like, for example, I review more than a couple of thousands police report. What I did basically possibly would be interesting for some of people who do research on this field. So Muharram is based on lunar calendar. So every year is shift back for 10 days. So what I did initially, I calculated Muharram for 2 centuries. So I knew, for example, in 1865, Muharram was in January. So I went back to the British Library. I asked, for example, for all newspaper for that month. But there was no digital version. I started paging every single newspaper during January to see if I can find any report. So I review, then obviously I'll collect thousands of police report and newspaper report, and then obviously lots of other historical material. Then I combine all of this information with the maps that I collect from different archives. Because that's the way that you have to layer information. Obviously it takes a huge amount of time to basically, first of all, collect all this information, digest them to understand what was happening in the 19th century. And then obviously, depending on narrative or a story that you want to tell, then obviously you use some part of this information.
And your Bombay fieldwork was in which years?
It was 2010 and 11.
Okay.
So that's why my photos are quite historical now, I guess. Like in Dongri, I know Bendi Bazaar is totally transformed now, but so the kind of. But I hope that I come back again to Bombay doing more refresh fieldwork. But after, although my fieldwork was intensive for 2 years, my archive basically studies and other study continues for a couple of other years, and that was a quite long time kind of dedication.
Could you tell us, Reza, what exactly the taboot represents?
Taboot is the coffin. Taboot means coffin, obviously, right? So when, as I said, the procession is basically a symbolic funeral. So they are performing those who've been martyred in the Karbala tragedy battle. So they are performing that they are carrying the body of these martyrs to the cemetery. So that's basically performing symbolic funeral. That's the taboot, coffin, basically.
Okay.
So that's why, as I said, like at the beginning in Bombay, like many other cities, the processions end to the seafront, which is the Indian idea of the funeral.
So, which brings me to another question by Mario. He said, how central is this concept of going towards to Islam? And
so I lost the signal for a second.
Is this concept of taking the taboot to the sea, is that a vital aspect of Islam?
It has nothing to do with Islam. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it is totally Indian idea of funeral. So if you go to for example, to Iran or Lebanon or Iraq or any other Shia place around the world, you won't see any Muharram procession end up to the seafront. That's unique for Indians. Let me use this opportunity to explain. Although in history, Shia ritual being initially or originally invented in Iraq, then Lebanon, and also Syria, and also in Egypt, But Iranian during Safavid Empire, they had a huge contribution to the Muharram ritual. So lots of these rituals actually came from Iran to India. Although the Shia dynasty in Hyderabad has a longer history than Safavid, but Iranian had a major contribution to the Shiism in India. However, during colonial time, Indian had a huge contribution to disperse Muharram all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So if you like the Khojas, they brought it to East Africa, or then even to Trinidad. So Indian brought the Muharram to Trinidad, and then even black people in Trinidad, they use Muharram as a way of challenging colonial authority. But through this transformation, the whole ritual totally lost the idea of its religiosity. So the black people who running Muharram ritual in Trinidad today, they had no idea what is that's coming from, but that's the gift of Indian to give it to black people to resist against colonial authority. The procession there is called Hossein, obviously named after Hussein, the martyrs of Ashura. But the people in Trinidad, they had no idea that's something that Indian brought. And that's why also they use the Indian idea of Muharram in Trinidad.
How fascinating. How fascinating is that? Reza, are there any records where the earliest celebrations of Muram took place in Bombay?
Well, the one that obviously that was easily you can push it. I mean, as early that I found any document, I found a report about Muharram. So
Yes.
like.
In which area of Bombay?
Oh, Dongri, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah, Dongri was always was the house, basically the home of the Muharram. Because I mean, if you look at the old city of Bombay, Dongri was almost the whole, basically old city, right?
Yes.
Almost, you know.
But
generally, I would say let's call it the Muhammad Ali Road.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that was the heart of the ritual. So all of the police reported with fighting, all these things happen all over around the Muhammad Ali Road, where is Dongri basically.
Correct. I don't know if this is a question you'd like to take. Ashwin wanted to know, when did Ganesh idols become so competitive? He's talking about the Ganesh festival and how it becomes so competitive and one Mohalla competing with another.
Well, I'm obviously not the expert of Ganesh.
Yes.
I wish that I had fellowship for longer, because my initial plan was work on Muharram, then I start work on Ganesh, because that was for me to move on. But that's the nature of ritual. So I can, although I'm not the expert of Ganesh and basically Ganpati, but I can tell you, I'm sure within the first few years, this competition is started. Why? That's a basic idea in rituals. Let me explain it briefly. So every ritual, based on Durkheim idea of ritual, creates a social solidarity. However, that's the very classic idea of ritual. But soon after that, today we know, although ritual create a solidarity, but create a border between me and others, we and others, right? So as soon as you have a ritual, the other has a new definition, right? So because of that, we start competing with others. And that's the competition of within the Ganesh is coming from, right? So as soon as one Mohalla or the locality, they have own Ganesh, the other one, they want to have a bigger Ganesh or more crowded Ganesh or whatever else, right? So that's the nature of ritual. That's not just about Muharram, it's not just about Ganesh or Ganpati, it's the nature of all
rituals. Okay.
All rituals, yeah.
Parag had a question. In one of your slides, you had a document which said police procession was available for Panja and Taboot. What he wants to know what Panja is.
Oh, Panja means in Arabic or even in Hindi means palm.
Palm.
Right? Palm, hand,
okay.
That part of hand, right? So the Shias, they use palm as a 5 object as the closest people to the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
But that became a sign for Shia Islam, showing the family of Muhammad, because the Shia support the family of Muhammad against other caliphs, right? Then it became a symbol on top of the flag, symbolic flag of the Imam Hussein in Karbala. So people, they are getting license for Panja, which is basically attached to the top of a symbolic flag. So for the license, they get license for tazia, for taboot, and for panja, which is the still practice today. So they can. Let me show you some image here again to show you what is actually panja.
While you're doing that, Reza, could you also
let me show you that. Sorry, just, let me share. So can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see these are flag, right? On top of that, you can see a little hand. I'm not sure. Let me just show it in different image. Sorry. That's the. So this is the panja. Can you see it? This is the panja.
Yes.
So it's a hand. So sometimes the panja is attached to the flag, on top of flag. Sometimes it's put it around the coffin. So this is a modern coffin, and sometimes is attached to the flags. Let me see if I can quickly find any image. Okay, it's here. So you can see these palms are attached to the top of flags during procession. This is called panja.
Mm-hmm. There was a question about the horse, which has been increasingly seen in processions in Bombay and in Lucknow, I understand from Isa.
The story is, as I said, there are two rituals developed through the history. One is called the street processions. The other one in Iran called passion play or tazia. That's, as I said, they are different. So the horse processions is a mime. So it's a theater which has no kind of vocal dimension. People performing the tragedy of Battle of Karbala, and mainly the situation that the family of Hussein were involved with after the battle, when they've been captured and brought from as a prisons from the Iraq to Damascus. So this horse particularly shows the horse of Imam Hussein, who was being martyred in the tragedy of the Karbala. So the whole ritual or performance shows the whole fighting without saying anything. But what's happened, people, the Shia people, often they know the story of tragedy during service session. So this is, you have to integrate all this ritual together to understand the whole landscape. So people, they've been told or tell the narrative of the tragedy during the service session. Then through the street procession, sorry, the street play, they see these kind of things replicated without saying anything. But because they know their story, they are basically interact with that street play. But the horse is just obviously represent the horse of Imam Hussein.
So according to Samira, who's listening in, she says the white horse called Zuljana is a replica of the horse that Imam Hussein is supposed to have ridden.
Absolutely, that's right. I didn't want to go to that detail because that's too much.
Sure.
Yeah.
Understand. Nazmi, if you could spend a little time talking about clashes between Irani Muslims and Konkani Muslims. I don't know if that's the scope of your talk, but if you could, that will be good.
It's not clash, it's tension or competition. Again, because as I said, as you see about the Ganesh, now everybody want to claim the authority over the ritual. Imagine the Muharram was the biggest festival in Bombay, and then Iranian came along and they want to have their own ritual performing in the city, right? But by the time Konkani, they've been the kind of claim the authority and control the ritual. It wasn't just always Konkanis. Later on, actually, Memons became dominating the ritual later in 19th century. So there was always a tension, not just because between the Konkanis and Iranians, even between the Khojas and the Boras, always they've been, is not fighting, but is a kind of tension, or I would call it a competition. And This is the case for also for Ismailis. So I didn't want to go that detail. For example, when Aga Khan arrived in Bombay, his follower, the Khojas, because they initially because he arrived in Bombay after centuries, and they start claiming that he doesn't have authority. They claim they are not Shia. So there was a huge court case against Aga Khan in 19th century. And then Aga Khan wanted to emphasize on the authority of his above the Khojas. They basically promote Muharram to emphasize these Khojas are the Shias, they are not Sunni. So the ritual became a huge, basically a medium, I would call it, or a system to negotiate. Let me put it in this way. Imagine Iranian, they always assume they are Shias, right? Because they live in a predominantly Shia country. When they arrive in Mumbai, they face with 6, 7 other Shia community who also they say we are Shia. So they've been shocked, I would say. And I have to say again that there is no other city around the world, for sure, that you can find so many different Shia Muslims in terms of diversity. Because, put it in short, we have Khojas, we have Boras, we have Iranians, we have the Shia Muslim from the UP. But the Khojas later on divided to Ismaili and Isna Ashari. Then Boras follow Ismaili Islam or Shia, but they are not following Aga Khan. So you can see there is no other place to see you find too many different Shia schools who are coming from different ethnic backgrounds. Therefore, here, the ethnic diversity, as I said, multiplied by the religious diversity, it creates extremely diverse situation. Let me put it this way. The way that I understand Bombay in 19th century even, it is absolutely what we call it super diversity today. Super diversity is a new idea that Steve Vetrovich coined it for explaining the cosmopolitan context of London in late for today. But if you look at the historical evidence, Bombay was a super diverse city in 19th century. So the number of different religious and social groups basically living together in Bombay are extremely diverse. So sometimes, I mean, I have to say, like, when I came to Bombay at the beginning, even the Shia Muslim in Bombay, they confused about different groups because there are too many. So like, I remember one guy would say, Khojas, Boras, and then at that time I say, okay, but later I found out, what does it mean Khojas, Boras? So there is no such thing, because there's so many different groups. Even for the local people, sometimes it's confusing to grasp such extremely diverse context.
Great. We have a micro-historian in our midst. His name is Vinayak, and he wants to know which groups end their procession at Rehmatabad.
All of them.
All of them.
So basically, all. So that's the thing. As I mentioned, the Muharram ritual is performed all over Mumbai today.
Mm-hmm.
So in Bandra, in Jogeshwari, in Malad, even to Mumbai, in Govandi. If you go through all these places, you can see procession all over the place, right? Then, by the night of Muharram, which we call it Tasua, there is the first procession that I show is still from the Dongri area. Mm-hmm. However, on the Ashura day, there is no procession in any part of Bombay. So although all processions are kind of parallel in all different places, the day of Ashura, there is no procession or ritual any other part of Bombay. Everybody are coming to Dongri, and then coming from different places, but the main part of the procession is start from the almost JJ hospital, not the JJ hospital itself, but I mean, that's the area. And everybody just moved to the Rahmatabad. So that's the kind of the biggest event that has happened there.
In your research, Reza, did you find whether the Mumbai Muram was celebrated any differently from the rest of India, especially Absolutely. This concept of ending at the seafront?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Bombay, first of all, is one of the unique places that the Muharram ritual became Shia ritual. Mm. So if you go to other places in India, still the ritual is a mixed ritual. So the sun is also involved with the ritual. Mm. However, in Bombay, procession, I'm not saying all celebration, procession is totally Shia. Mm-hmm. And the only place in Bombay that the sun is also involved with Muharram is Dharavi. And Dhabi, because of its nature, is isolated from the rest of the city. So it's still in Dhabi, Muharram procession is dominated by Sunni, but it is a kind of separate ritual. Muharram, Mumbai Muharram, as we know it, which is mainly housed in Dongri, is a totally Shia ritual today. And that makes it very different. That makes it different with the rest of India. So even in Delhi, Sunnis are involved with the ritual, with the procession. I have to distinguish. There are some commemoration by Sunnis. I'm not talking about the Wahhabis by Sunnis, but it's a kind of gathering. It's not a ritual. It's not a procession. However, if you go to Delhi or other city, as far as I'm informed, I'm not sure because I haven't done the proper field work over there, but the other cities, the still Sunnis are involved with the procession, but in Bombay is just pure Shia ritual.
Is there any relevant? I want to know if Matam, as we know it, as celebrated in Mumbai, has it always been part of the Muram ritual? And yeah. Arnaz wants to know if the lighting of Bibi Fatima lighting a candle after the battle has any relevance to the present day mourning. If you could take both these together.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I have to say, the Shia Muslims all over around the world during last 12th century constantly invented rituals. So we have, although some historians, they want to just, categorize all of the ritual within 5 or 6 category, but based on my field work in 7 Iranian cities and Bombay, I can say there is so many rituals that there is no way to put them in 6 categories. That's the first thing. And often what has happened, people, they even get lots of historical ritual that has nothing to do with Muharram. They turn it for commemoration of Muharram. Like some of the ritual in Iran actually are pre-Islamic rituals that people, they basically reinvent them for Muharram, even in Iran. So, like for example, even when you call it the turning on the candle lightning is obviously is a kind of way of mourn. So you can just see it all over the place. That kind of ritual is often performed after Ashura Day. So when the Ashura finish, all the processions are end, but there is a ritual called Sham Ghariban, which is basically kind of sympathy with those who remain after the tragedy, the family of Imam Hussein. So they are lighting the candle for kind of the mourn, which is also performed everywhere. So I forgot the second question you made.
The second question was Matam always associated with Muram, and was it always bloody and violent?
Well, I have to say the Matam in Urdu term has a couple of different meanings. Matam in Urdu means basically means mourn. So sometimes when I'm in context of Bombay, they say Matam and they say the Matam. So the Matam is generally mourning or commemoration or any form of sometimes body expression of the mourn. So like chest beating. So people just hit their basically chest. So it is a bodily expression. It's not, but often is referred to the flagellation, using the blade as you said is the blade. It is very old tradition, has a own history. I don't want to go through it with the detail, but flagellation was invented with Christians in Renaissance time in Venice and Italy, but gradually been borrowed by Shia Muslims. Some people, they confuse, they want to understand that the Shia flagellation in a way is understood in the Christian context, but it's totally wrong. I have a paper on this to explain why it's different. However, then it became a ritual in Iran, then come to India. And it is often known that was brought to India by Iranian military officers. And that's a part of the history of flagellation. I mean, explained it shortly. Because Muharram always been involved with a body expression of mourn, which is in Middle East just hitting your body, right? But imagine during Safavid time, when the military officers, they want to express their own passionate, for them, for normal people, they hit their body by hand, right? For a military officer, that was nothing. So they want to use the military tools, like a sword, right? They hit their body with that to show they are, very sad for that. And lots of these officers been hired by Mughal empires in India, and some historians like Nakash, which has a very fascinating actually paper on this topic. One of his arguments is it's possibly, it's not for sure, but possibly flagellation was brought by these the military officers from Iran, brought to India, and then gradually became commonly practiced.
As part of the ritual. Reza, do Khojas and the UP Shias have different processions even now?
The UP is not, Khojas also not, but always they have own place, you know. They are not like Iranian, because it's funnily enough, because Iranian become, or the Mughals, they've been a very big community. But after dependency, most of them been, you know, immigrated from India. They are a small community, but extremely influential, I have to say, in the Shia communities. But so they are running, as I said, those only the procession that is, they used to be silent procession. They're supporting the rest of rituals and procession, because all of these, most of the Shia places are associated with Iranian and owned by them. But Khojas, they don't have their own ritual. But Boras, as I explained, they have own ritual. I also have a book chapter actually about the Khojas, because it's extremely fascinating subject, because their ritual is that's a book chapter about which is at the front page, is from one of my pictures. That's published by North Carolina University about the Muslim prayer. But the Boras, they have very exclusive rituals. Although again, they are supporting the rest, especially they're giving medical support because of the flagellation during Muharram procession. They're giving all of the medical support coming from the Boras. However, they also participate to all of the event in other Shia Muslims, but their own rituals are exclusive. So you can see they keep their own separate identity. The other thing which is fascinating about Boras, they are following the lunar calendar, but they follow the ancient Egyptian lunar calendar. Therefore, when they calculate Ashura, it's coming a different day compared with the rest of Shia. So they are commemorating Ashura Day in a different day. And that was good for me, because I was able to observe both Ashura in different, they've been in different days. So I was able to join them.
Oh, speaking of Ashura, Bisni wanted to know if there is any Ashura Khanas in Bombay.
Sorry, say it again, the voice was just...
She wanted to know if there are any Ashur Khanas in Bombay.
Well, Ashur Khana is there is a term called Hosseiniya in Iran. So it is a religious and community place dedicated to the Shia events. That makes it separate from mosques, right? So there is a reason that they do that. Because part of the reason is sometimes in history, the Shia live with the Sunnis, so they have one mosque together, but they want to have their own separate place for the Shia, for the Ashura rituals, right? So they're inventing what is called Hosseiniya. However, that is obviously named after Hussein, right? But that kind of place being called differently, like they call it Zainabiyya. Zainabiyya was the sister of Imam Hussein, who was also involved with the tragedy. And so they keep it like Fatimiyya. So often Zainabiyya is named for the Shia place associated with ladies, right? But that's what happened in Iran. But in
Mumbai,
in India in generally, they use different terms like Imambara and Ashur Khana. So these two terms, they are kind of equivalent. So although in Mumbai they are not often used Ashur Khana, but basically Imambara are the same as Ashur Khana. So we shouldn't think about like Ashur Khana is different, but actually the same, but they name them differently. But in Mumbai, there is no place that they call it Ashur Khana, but that's the equivalent with Imambara.
Okay, now absolutely the last question. Towards the end of your talk, Reza, you gave a glimpse of Wahhabism. There was a question if you could spend a short while explaining the concept of Wahhabism.
All right, it's difficult to keep it very short, but there is a claim that Wahhabism is a very recently invented school of Islam. So it doesn't have long history. And easily can trace it to 19th century. And even some people, they claim that was a colonial invention. Well, obviously, it's difficult to accept all these claims because I don't want to be biased on this. But the basic idea of Wahhabism is they says, okay, we're going to go back to the very tradition of the Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, when he was living. That's the first thing. The second, they are literalists. So means you are not interpreting the text of Quran. They are just saying, okay, whatever is in the text, you don't need to understand it. That's all. So they have a very narrow and kind of orthodox idea of Islam, and almost no tolerance, and became a kind of hardliner. If that's the shortest way I can explain it.
Thanks. I think it gives a glimpse to the person who asked the question.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Reza, for a very informative session and for so patiently answering all those multiple questions which came in towards the end. And I think that's an indication of how interested people were in your topic.